In this video, I will start working on the update user details test method. And before I create HTTP request to test this test method, I'll go to my web services application and I will have a look at the REST controller and see what request parameters it can accept. So I'll go to my source main Java and then I will go to the controller package and open up user controller. Scroll down to put mapping. Here we go, the put mapping for update user details. So this web service endpoint accepts user ID as a path parameter, and then it accepts user details request model. Let's have a look what we can provide. And here we can send first name, last name, email, password, and addresses. And ideally for this HTTP request, I would even create a new request model so that I do not provide email address and password, because I remember for the password we have created a separate flow, and for email address I also like to have a different flow rather than letting users update their password or email address with this HTTP request. So in update user details HTTP request we can include all these parameters. Let's have a look at the service implementation. So I will go to the REST controller put mapping, and here's my update user method in the service layer. I will open its implementation. And here we first find user by ID from the database. Yes, and then we set first name and last name only. So even if user includes their email address, it will not be updated because we are updating only first name and last name on the user entity. And then we take this user entity and we save it to the database and return response. So let's write a test method that tests this functionality. So I will go back to my test class and I'll open it up and I will create a new test method right under the test get user details. So my test will start with test, and that's going to be method C already. And let me add comments. That will be test update user details. All right, so let's create the HTTP request, and as usual we will start with given, and now we will set headers. First header that we are going to send is content type, so that's going to be content type application JSON, because we are including user details in the body of our HTTP request. So that's going to be JSON. And the next content type is going to be accept, and this is because we want to accept back information in JSON format, so I will also use accept JSON. And the next header is authorization header. This is because our RESTful web service endpoints are protected with Spring security, and every request like update user details, get user details, or delete a user will need to include the authorization header. So to add authorization header, I will use header, and then inside of the header, I will provide key value pairs. The key is authorization, and the value is the authorization header, which we have received earlier when we were testing the login user. So I will copy the authorization header, and this is it for the headers. Next, we will need to provide the path parameter. And we already know how to do it using path param, and path parameter also accept key value pairs. So we are going to include user ID as a path parameter. I will name it ID, and as a path parameter we provide user ID, which we have also received earlier when we were testing the user login. So I will reuse user ID value as well. And now after we've included path parameter, we need to include the body of HTTP request. The body will contain JSON payload with user details that we want to update. So let me add body, and then I will define user details above. And we've also discussed this earlier, that user details can be created as a map, and then a framework will convert this map into a JSON object. So I'll create a new map that will contain string for the key and object for the value, and I'll call it user details equals new hash map, like this. And I will now use user details and provide it inside of the body. So user details object will be converted into JSON, and that user details object will contain key value pairs that we want to update. So I'll use user details and I'll put there key value pairs like first name, I think, first name, and I will provide the new first name here. So let's say it's not Sergey, but let's say Serge, like this. And family name, use unchanged, so that will be last name, and I will provide Kargapolov as the last name. And the first name and the last name, the spelling of it, we can look up in our previous examples. For example, here, when we were validating the get user details API call, we were reading first name and last name, so we can copy them and paste them here just to make sure we don't have a typo. Okay, so now we have user details with new value. First name will be updated. We put user details into the body of our HTTP put request this time. So now let's say when this HTTP request is executed as HTTP put. So this time is not get, it's not post, but put, and it is put because in our user controller, if we go there, the update user details has the put mapping. To update user details, we need to send HTTP put with the request body that contains new user details. Okay, so let's go back to my test method and continue. So when HTTP put request is sent to the following URL, and we put URL together this way, so it's context path plus the path. I will paste it here. So we have context path, which is in the case of our application is mobile-app-ws, and then we have / users mapping and path ID. So this ID, the curly brackets and the ID will be replaced with the user ID value that we provide here, and the name of this path param will have to match the name of the path parameter here. Okay, so when HTTP put request is sent to the following URL, then we can start asserting some of the things. Then we expect back that the status code of this HTTP response is equal to 200, which means, okay, the request was successful. And then we also want this HTTP response to contain information in JSON. And if the content type of this HTTP response is different than JSON, then we don't want this test to pass. So I assume that the content type is also JSON. And if I use semicolon now, I shouldn't get any errors. Yes. So we're almost done. And as usual, we can continue and we can extract the response so that we can then work with that response and take JSON document and read its key value pairs and assert if the values are correct and our test is passing. So let's extract the response from it, and we will assign this response to a new object, response given. Okay, so we have the response, and our next step is to work with that response. Let's do that in the following video.